welcome to the AcuCongress Federal Fly-In Advocacy Training on the bill. So I had a meeting yesterday with a Medicare biller, a single person in somebody's office. It wasn't one of the national billers or anything like that, just somebody who's dealing with a pretty heavy veteran population who would also like to bill Medicare directly. And they are, there's still so much confusion about what the 2020 guidelines say. And, and I wish I had better news for them. I don't. At the end of the day, you cannot bill directly if you're a licensed acupuncturist, and only a licensed acupuncturist. So we want to get into what this bill actually says and what you know about it, because everything in your 15 to 20 minutes, the things that are the most important are that you're going to know that bill backwards and forwards, because if you don't, then you cannot assume that congressional staff do. And we're going to get more into this when we talk about the flow of things, but ultimately, you have to know your bill. And I would say, by show of hands, who has ever lobbied Congress, taken part in a fly-in, and presented on a bill that they did not read? Anyone? I feel like there's a lot. I think that anyone who took part in the ASA fly-in in 2019, they probably did know the acupuncture bill pretty well, but I doubt that they knew the FDA bill that we were also looking to make changes on. And what's funny about that is I think they tended to stick to the script on that FDA bill, and they ended up getting 20 some odd co-sponsors on it, on a bill they didn't really understand. We tried. But at the end of the day, it wasn't acupuncture specific. And so it is a very common thing that people go to lobby Congress and they have never read fully what their bill says. And I'm not even talking about just knowing how to cross-reference things. I mean, they've never read it. And so what we wanted to do tonight was make sure that everybody has access to the bill, has read the bill, understands it, and that way they can summarize it for the congressional staff member when we get to that time period. All right, I'm reiterating the goal. The goal is 100 co-sponsors. It turns out that some people have already started working on this, which we encourage, and I'm so excited about this. We are about to pick up, I think, 7 or 8 new co-sponsors just from people going home from the symposium. One person actually wrote in and said that they went to a wedding after the symposium, and that their member of Congress actually attended that wedding, and they talked to them, and that they are going to sign on to this bill. So it's amazing how magic can happen when everything lines up. And so that's what I'm hoping for when we get to this fly-in, that we 100% pick up the legislators that we're looking for, because ultimately we need to make sure that we have 100 co-sponsors. And I said this at the symposium, but I'm going to say it again. I would like that done by May of 2022. And the reason is that's a good time. Appropriations goes through in April. In May, they're going to be, in all likelihood, getting a bill prepared for passage that has to do with Medicare expansion. And so we want to make sure that we have added that requisite 100 co-sponsors before they go to start stripping these hundreds of bills that will apply to Medicare expansion. Acupuncture for Seniors Act 2021. It is HR 4803. And we are in the 117th Congress. That is a link for that bill. You can always find those bills on congress.gov. We will post all of that stuff in Basecamp for you. And I know we will have all of this loaded up, because when it really, really gets to where it kicks into high gear is around 2 weeks prior. So we're going to spend between now and Thanksgiving making sure that everybody has their materials and that they are doing their homework. And that homework is doing the research, filling out the templates that we're going to give you so that you can construct a perfect 15 to 20-minute meeting with your legislator. All right, just to quickly point out, it says right here what the short title is. That's Acupuncture for Our Seniors Act of 2021. I always forget the our. Acupuncture for Seniors Act is what I've been calling it. I'm wrong. It is Our Seniors of 2021. And in section 2, after the short title, it tells you what they're doing. It's coverage for acupuncturist services under the Medicare program. That acupuncturist services is the most important part of that. And it also gives you the general section of the Social Security Act that you want to change. And so when we get into that particular bill, it's not just important to know what the bill says, it's also important to know what is it changing. And so that is the US code right there that it is changing. And you want to know that as well. So what does this bill do? Well, it extends what is already there in section 1861 of the Social Security Act. And where it ends with a certain group of practitioners, it actually would strike the and in one section, and it would add a comma and the word and then it gives a definition for qualified acupuncture services as performed by qualified acupuncturist. And that's what we would be called. Okay.
I saw Bill just unmute.
Blake, I'm going to
try?
leave it. Absolutely. Bill Weinstein, what does it do?
So it's a bill that part of the bill includes licensed acupuncturists as providers recognized under Medicare, because they didn't exist as a profession when the Medicare bill was written and signed in the late 60s.
Very, very true. That is absolutely true. More than that, when there has been legislation prior to this, there were obstacles like we didn't have a BLS code. That was a problem. I know the naturopaths have always had to combat that as well.
What kind of code?
The Bureau of Labor Statistics code, a BLS code. It's basically how they use all your BLS statistics to decide how a profession fits in and could be funded by CMS.
Isn't there another name for that kind of code that I've seen, or the name for the list of codes? It's always BLS.
It's a BLS code. Yeah, okay. They're job codes, right? That's what that is, but it's coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So the BLS code was probably one of the largest obstacles. And what this bill does is it absolutely defines who we are as a provider group. It does a couple of things in a very short space. One of them is it will not just define who we are, but the second thing that it does is it will start getting into reimbursement, not the rates, that is all handled in rules and regulation, that's going to come out from CMS guidelines, but it will determine that there are services that are reimbursable, not just as practitioners who are getting referrals coming out of hospitals, but it will define that we are also providers that would be working inside of these types of facilities. And so it will get into both inpatient and outpatient reimbursement. And so a lot of that is, sure.
Does it expand the number of conditions that can be treated? Or is that
we took those out. No, we took them out. We took them out because it takes 10 years to pass a federal law. And we were afraid that if we did not take those out, that depending on who was in charge at CMS or Health and Human Services and what interpretations they decided to take, we just did not want to be limited. And we were afraid that anyone could interpret that piece of legislation by locking us in only to the 12 or 13 diagnostic procedures, right? I think it was chronic back pain, osteoarthritis, and a host of things that had to do with oncology. Our fear was we would be the only provider group that would be locked into those types of things specifically. And so at the end of the day, there are factions who are lobbying on behalf of acupuncturists. I have certainly been doing this since 2017. NCCAOM is also has Smith Buckland over there. And at the end of the day, I would say it comes across our desks more, along with Michelle Lau. And everybody was in agreement that we really didn't want to stick with that. We either wanted to expand the list if they were going to keep it, or just get rid of the list, because at the end of the day, they're going to cover acupuncture entirely. And so it would have made that piece of legislation precarious for us.
Yeah, I would say I'd point you to, if you open up the bill proper, looking at section 2A31, 2A31. It does say, as the qualified acupuncturist is legally authorized to perform under state law. So that is a really beautiful clause that does allow for not only the titling differences between states, which is huge, but also for the many different services, as some states allow for primary care provision versus more limited scopes.
That's right. The titling is important, and I'm not sure that the acupuncturists have experienced it the way that naturopathic physicians did. I mean, they are constantly in a state where they're worried about the encroachment from within, because there are different titling mechanisms that detail different educational experiences within the industry. We have the exact same thing, just so we're clear. And leaving it to state statutes, because in Florida they're acupuncture physicians, right? In New Mexico, I believe that they are. Steve would be able to tell me. He would actually school me on this. I believe they are. They have the most expansive scope in the United States, and their primary care there too. Obviously, their primary care in California. So the things that you call yourselves may be different than the BLS code, which is the licensed acupuncture part. However, this is not a problem for us in this bill, because once you defer to the states with regards to the statute and their licensing, and you turn everything over to them, then the federal government doesn't have to do anything further with what we deal with in our titling. Does that make sense?
Question. I think it makes sense. I have a question on that. So to me, when I hear that, I think immediately Republican. Do you think that at all that would be potentially, because we've talked many times that this is not a partisan bill in any form or fashion. Do you have any thoughts on whether a Republican member of Congress might be sold on that aspect, leaving it up to the states?
I think that, yeah. So yes, I mean, the simplicity of this bill, and is sort of the beauty of this bill. We don't want to get super granular in how we define ourselves, how we present, just for a reimbursement issue, right? So, I mean, yes, I think that is something that Republican offices would be interested
talking
in.
Point, but it might be something that
Right. Well, here's my main concern. It's more about how do you, if this comes up, how do you defend it? So for instance, we met with Young Kim. Michelle Lau was gracious enough to invite me to her meetings with Judy Chu. Young Kim I wasn't able to make, but with Michelle Steele. The meeting with Young Kim, she talked about the bill, but then she wanted to know why there was no national certification standard that was in there. Our point was that the industry itself has not made the determination. You know, there are two certifying bodies, right? You've got the California Acupuncture Board, and then you've got the NCCAOM. To list that takes it one step too far, because let's say one or the other, if they determined it would be NCCAOM or the California Acupuncture Board, at any point, you would be canceling out tens of thousands of acupuncturists or inducing a heavier burden, right? So if you just leave it to the state, then the state has already made the determination of what tests they've had to take, all of the hoops they had to jump through in order to be licensed acupuncturist in that state. And that is why we leave it, you know, to the state statute. But it was a Republican who brought it up. And so, you know, unfortunately, we have to address one thing, and that is, yes, we have the national, we have the NCCAOM. I was about to try and do the whole name and I would have butchered it, and I'm just too tired to work out all the letters tonight. But we also in the state of California have, prior to the NCCAOM's test, there was the California Acupuncture Board's test. And it's, we're talking again about tens of thousands of licensed acupuncturists in the state of California who may not have ever sat for the NCCAOM exams, because it's not a requirement in the state of California that they do so. And it is a requirement that they take that California exam in order to be licensed. We don't want to get into the ins and outs of that part of our industry. We've got some problems that are coming down the pike, one of them being name change issues. Another with the accrediting body for the universities right now. So there's some issues there, and they have a name change. And that actually is going to affect every state scope of practice, where ACOM accreditation is one of the main requirements for their education and getting their license. So again, it came from a Republican office. It is something that we're going to have to address. We do have to be honest about what's happening here, and be able to, with authority, explain that yes, there are a couple of credentialing exams, and one out of a state that is sort of your origin for licensed acupuncturist. That is not changing. It is not going anywhere. And the easiest way to make sure that we are as inclusive as we possibly can be to all of our licensed acupuncturists in every single state who want to bill Medicare is to leave it to the states to determine who is qualified to work, to actually perform the services. The federal statute will not get into that, guys. There is no national licensing component. There never will be. I start laughing a lot. Lately, I've just had a couple of things come across my desk. One of them was a guy professing to be a certified holistic health practitioner, national certified holistic health practitioner. That's great. Where's the licensing? You know, who does the accrediting on that? They put something out stating that they wanted all of this money and all of this effort to go into integrative health practitioners. And they said it as if it had been defined. That has never been defined. We're not even close to a federal definition for integrative health practitioner. And so we can't just make stuff up, I guess is my point. And we need to be proud of where we were coming from and how we got here. We need to recognize that they are going to ask about national accreditation. We're going to have to be able to respond about name change issues with ACOM. We're going to have to talk about why there is a difference in our states with regards to licensing requirements, with regards to the tests that they're required to take, and that it actually is just a part of this industry and who we are. So those are things that you need to be on the lookout for. Make sure that you've got your own formulated response to those tougher questions, and they will come, by the way, as well. Right. But it ends there. I mean, honestly, shortest bill I've ever worked, ever. It is so simple. And what we're trying to ask people to do is so easy. It's just co-sponsorship. We're not asking for mammoth requests. We're asking that the licensed acupuncturists who are the experts in the field be defined within the Social Security Act so that they can perform their services autonomously and be reimbursed for them directly from CMS. That's it. That's all it does. It is that elegant a bill.
I have a question. It's not about the bill per se, but it is a practical question. And it maybe it's on the map that you showed us, but I'm not sure. Is there a breakdown for how many acupuncturists there are in any given congressional district?
Yes. So we have that.
You provided that to us?
Yes. So if there was a collaborative state with Atlantic Symposium, they had a collaborative agreement with me as well. So there's 14 states that I went ahead and broke that down for. Bill, we've had the one with ASNI for some time, and we've got it up in Basecamp, both in ASNI and I'll put it up there.
Okay.
And then, so yes, there actually is a district by district breakdown of how many acupuncturists are in, and that's part of the messaging that you're going to be putting into your 2-pagers. For a lot of you, you're going to have that information provided. The state of Massachusetts, I don't know what to do with you guys. You're going to have to FOIA request that information because they are not giving it up. So, I mean, I don't have standing to do a FOIA request on that. I think in the state of Massachusetts, you have to be a resident. So if somebody's interested, I can walk them through how to put together a Freedom of Information Act request on who the acupuncturists are. So Bill, not only do we know how many, but we know exactly who they are as well. And they're coming from the licensee list. So it's tedious, but yes, we have all of that info. And if there are no questions about this bill, I mean, honestly, we knew it was going to be short because it is just a short bill. But I just wanted to go ahead.
We have a question from Susan. Is there a form letter or two for patients and family rather than us?
Is there a form letter or two
to send
from our patients? So yes. So we're actually the fly-in isn't a letter writing campaign. This is an actual, there's so much action in these things. Now, after that, for follow-up, yes, we've got scripts that you have for your patients to follow up. We've got scripts that you have for you as a practitioner. And we'll do those, we'll send those out in Basecamp as well. We will continue to check up with people to see what the response from their various meetings was. And if we picked up co-sponsorship, wonderful. And if we didn't, then we will still be there working, checking in with people to make sure that they're placing those phone calls. And, you know, we need to follow up until we get to a yes each time. So, so yes, lots of form letters, which Nicholas is probably running for the hills at this point. Okay.
Kevin, did you have a question?
The only question I have, this appears very simple to me, pretty understandable. I like that it's being thrown back to the states to make it less complex. I believe in states' rights anyway. The only two things I had a thought on was one, the hospitals, and you do have to have some training specifically for doing acupuncture in a hospital. Is that correct? Or is that a state thing?
So actually, it is a hospital specific thing. How they choose to run those programs is up to them. But they will often point to the state statutes in terms of who they decided to hire. But they would have to be, I mean, we just at the symposium had Megan Gale talk about the hospital handbook project. And so she actually, I wish she was on tonight, because she would be the better person to answer how hospitals and hospital administrators are going to handle that. But it does not matter with our legislation. That's not what's addressed. And so this is really just it leaves the door open. If you're a hospital administrator and you have to hire a licensed acupuncturist, but they can't bill directly, and then you've got to make sure that they have appropriate supervision. I mean, it's complicated, and hospitals would much rather deal with practitioners who can bill directly. And so that's what our bill addresses. As to whether or not licensed acupuncturists are trained in order to work in specific places, that's always up to the company that's hiring them.
Yeah. And that would include not just necessarily hiring, but just an acupuncturist being allowed to come into a hospital and treat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the other part, this actually may even go off a little bit from what tonight's discussion's about, but ultimately it's something that as an acupuncturist, I wish would be included. And I haven't heard many acupuncturists really discuss this, and that is about dry needling, because certainly a lot of dry needling now being done by, I don't know how many states, I think it's at least 22, 23. PTs are already under Medicare for the most part. And I just think that somehow we should be included in a dry needling, inclusion of dry needling for physical therapy, which would make our job, what should I say? We would even get more business.
So that would come down to state statutes being opened everywhere. And I think that there's, just from a national level, my main concern federally is that, because I do know the lobbyists for the other organizations, and they are seeking to influence CMS with regards to their guidelines. And we went back and forth with CMS just in trying to make sure that they didn't lower our rates and use dry needling code instead of the older acupuncture code. There was so much about that was kind of precarious to begin with. So the main goal for us right now is just to recognize that PTs and chiros and anybody else who has dry needling in their scope of practice, while the current guidelines state that they don't pay for dry needling, it will not stay that way. I know it won't stay that way because the CMS is going to try and determine what codes they're going to crosswalk. And so they're still in those discussions. And that means that the door is open to everybody right now. If we don't get defined inside of the SSA and guidelines get changed and it expands the groups that do qualify as auxiliary personnel, I don't know what to tell you. Except to say that acupuncture is going to be performed in hospitals and other facilities and referrals and whatnot. It's going to be performed by people who are not acupuncturists. because we aren't defined. So,
Yeah.
and they are. So
Right.
we actually we're a little behind the 8 ball. They are already where we need to be. The only thing that they have to do is influence CMS to show that they have cause and a reasonable viability to be able to needle for dry needling, to be reimbursed. And it's not going to be a hard statement to make, because lots and lots of states, you mentioned 24, I believe it's actually over 30,
Mhm.
allow for dry needling in scope. So, you know, we are at this space right now, and that is that we have to change the Social Security Act. All they have to do is change regulations. So
Right.
we have a little tougher time in this, but you know, we also have to influence regulations as well while we're there, and that is something that is being done all the time, and we have to kind of address that as well, because again, we have ACOM that has changed their name, and that actually does affect federal guidelines and federal legislative efforts. So you know, they're currently listed, and we have to work to change that, unfortunately.
Okay.
So realized when I was doing I was like, we're going to go into this bill, and then I reread the bill and I was like, oh gosh, that's going to take 0 time at all. So some of this we went over while we were at the symposium, but I just wanted to make sure that I stated again. The asks are different than what the messaging is. The asks that we have are very, very simple. We will not waver from these asks, and that is in the House that you co-sponsor the bill. And if we're in the Senate, we would like to see them be a champion on the Senate side and run a companion bill that is identical language in both chambers. Next slide. So all of these start out this way. Again, the messaging is different. The message is, you know, opioids are covered, acupuncture is covered, licensed acupuncturists are not. And we will load these in. It's on that piece of paper, Bill, that we need the stats for not only how many licensed acupuncturists, but also the patients that probably would constitute, what the Medicare stats are, what the census is showing us with regards to changes. The Kaiser Family Foundation has a terrific way of documenting incremental changes over time with regards to how many people have signed up for Medicare and how many people are beneficiaries. So there's a lot of information that you guys are going to actually get, and then we'll create the documents for you. You don't have to do any of that. We'll just turn around and spit them back out to you. This is the one that I wanted to focus on. Since the bill did not take forever, Blake,
Mhm.
you were so rushed at the symposium, and I'm sorry. So I'm actually going to let you talk about the way the flow of your particular 15 to 20 minute meeting will be.
Great.
Go for it.
So what we've talked about many times is research. And what I typically hear, I'm a researcher, and so I come at this with a very critical lens. But when you go into one of these rooms, you generally have already researched everything that the legislator has introduced, what they voted for, what they voted against, what their temperature really is in regard to healthcare, and what we're asking them to sign on to. But about 98+% of the time, you will not actually be meeting with your legislator. You'll be meeting with their staff. And so when you go in, typically they may not have heard about you. They may not know where you're from, and you may not know where they're from. But we will be letting you know which staffer you are scheduled to meet with at the very minimum. And so not only should you be researching your legislator, but you should also be researching the staffer. What is their focus? Where are they from? We gave you many resources on where to find that stuff out. What this allows for is you to build rapport. You build rapport with every single one of your patients, and you need to build rapport with this new person that you're educating, because you're asking them to do something just like you are asking your patients to respond to what you are recommending. And so the first 5 minutes of the meeting typically go as, hello, I'm going to give you an introduction to myself. Here is my name. Here is what I do. I am a licensed acupuncturist, and I practice in this manner, and I see this patient population in this area. I am one of your constituents, and I vote, kind of thing. We talked about that from the very beginning. But what you also need to see and open up is, who are they? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Are you actually from the state or from the district that I'm in? Most of the time, they're actually going to be, somebody who's on internship from a college in New York or from, somewhere else. But occasionally they'll be from an area of your state, and you can again dig in just a little bit and say, oh, this happened just 2 weeks ago. The staffer that I was meeting with is from Burns, Oregon, and my very favorite place in Oregon is not 20 miles away from it. And so we had a great connection there. But what we've already talked about is there is also a confusion about professional identity. Many people don't know who acupuncturists are. And so you introduce yourself, you ask them to introduce themselves and give some background. And then you ask, what is your familiarity with the acupuncture profession? They may say, oh, I see an acupuncturist. My mom's an acupuncturist, whatever it is. If they say that, note it down. That's great. But most of the time, they will not know too much about who we are. And so that's where what Callie was saying earlier. I attended a institution for 4 years that is recognized by the US, that is recognized and accredited, accredited by an institution or a commission that is credentialed through the US Department of Education. That then tells them, okay, this is the real deal. These people are actually attending a school that taught them something, and now they are a licensed provider by the state. You can provide any additional information about modalities that are typically used in the profession, but generally, since our ask is not much about those specifics, you don't need to go too far into it. But we provide patient-centered care, and that's really what they want to hear. The next 10 minutes, and this is being generous with saying 10 minutes. Occasionally, these meetings do go quite quickly. You're delivering your ask. And so this is where you actually introduce the bill. You open up any questions to them. And you really want to, throughout this entire process, be reading the room. If Callie will tell you that every single one of these staffers are required to take notes physically at every single meeting, and that's true. And so you have to read the room in 2 ways, because I will see the staffer looking like this, but they're actually writing down in their notebook exactly what I'm saying. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're distracted. Sometimes you'll see a staffer who is very good at maintaining eye contact while also taking notes. But if you see them get distracted, you see the eyes glaze over, you want to make sure, give them a quick check-in. You're like, do you have any questions on what I've said so far? Do you have any comments? Do you have any experience with anything like passing a bill like this? Or do you have any perspective on your legislator signing on or co-sponsoring a bill like this? So read the room, make sure that you're regularly checking in. Being dynamic on Zoom is quite challenging, especially when you have some nerves that are influencing your, talky fasty kind of thing, but make sure that you're regularly checking in with them and reading. The nice thing with this is we hope that you don't go into any of these rooms alone. If you want to go into a room alone and you've done this, 30 times, great. But generally, we want to have another person from your district. If they're not from your district, then your state. That's obviously going to happen more often in a senatorial meeting rather than a representatives meeting. But having somebody who is also monitoring this, making sure that they can read between the lines of what this staffer is saying, as well as keeping track of the time that you are speaking is really, really important. I think it was lesson number 2, recording number 2 of this, where we go into each of the individual roles. And so go back and read through those roles, the timekeeper, the meeting leader, all of those, just so that you can get a bit of an idea of who has what skill set. And then finally, the last 5 minutes is your wrap up. And you hopefully have, again, while reading the room, if you need to check back in, asking questions, great. But make sure that you say, do you have any additional questions? Do you have any perspective to share with us? And then this is very important because half the time the staffers just had a new schedule handed them like on their desk that morning. And so they just had to completely remap out their next 2 weeks of meetings and follow up and all of that. And so ask what their follow-up preferences are. Do you want me to follow up tomorrow versus next week versus 2 weeks out? And they will be quite clear in what's reasonable, what's a reasonable ask for them for follow-up. In general, what you'll hear is a week or 2. If they say, yeah, 1 or 2 weeks, follow up in 1 week, be diligent. Make sure that if you have promised any educational materials, you provide that immediately following the meeting, but then follow up in a week, say, hey, has anything come up that I can provide clarification on? Before you do that, make sure that you have gone in to the bill to make sure that they haven't gone ahead and co-sponsored it, because then the email should say, thank you for co-sponsoring, by the way. That was one of my flubs in one of my first times meeting with an office. And so do your research continuously, check back in, see if they have any questions, and then open up to say, we understand that you are obviously very busy. If you would like for me to follow up at another time, when would you like that to be? So be open, be flexible, but always be very diligent. And if you promise something, just like we tell you to never lie, if you promise something, follow through. Follow up and follow through, I think is your phrase, Callie.
That's right. Always follow up, right? Follow through. Follow through is different. Follow up always. I have told people this, and lots of people already know this. I make it very clear that I'm going to be calling them very quickly, and a lot, until they decide that they would just like to have me not call anymore and go ahead and sign on. So so it's the follow up until you achieve that follow through, and the follow through is that they go ahead and they co-sponsor. So nicely done. And we're going to again, I just need a few more days this week to get it all loaded up, and I apologize for the delay in all of this. And I want you to understand that it is about to get insane. So so enjoy this quiet moment.
And early action is the best way to prevent the crazy. So the research that we've been telling you about, this is not going to be allowable that first week of December. So make sure that you're looking up all of this. Those last minute pieces of research are going to be which staff member you're meeting with. So be flexible on that, because the meeting may not be scheduled until the night before or the morning of. But the rest of it, make sure that you have it already done, written down in whatever manner you need.
Highlighted research here because we are I'm going to put the templates up the same day that I have made the request for the meetings so that I can add all of this information at the same time. But essentially, you will have templates that will guide you through what you want to be looking for in order to get the most out of your research of both your legislator and hopefully we'll just go ahead and start the process, at least on the health legislative aids. So we'll have that information to you as well. It is important that it does appear that there are lots of people who are going to be doing this by themselves. We have a lot of representation at AcuCongress, but not a lot of group representation until you get to Senate meetings. So I would tell you that the vast majority of you, I'm encouraging you again, make sure you bring a patient, because at least then you've got a buddy. And you've got that testimonial that's so important that they're looking for. And then Blake and I will absolutely be available, and we'll find other people who are willing to represent from a state standpoint who can come in and help too. So you don't have to do this alone if you don't want to.
A question.
Sure.
Will you be providing guidelines for patients?
Yes. Yeah. We went over it a little bit at the symposium, but I want to reiterate here. One of the questions that was asked was, did we want a patient that was reflective of the Medicare population? And Ellen went over this. You're going to get that video tonight posted so you can take a look at what she says as well. There is such a vast education gap in Congress regarding acupuncture in general, that our feeling is, that with regards to the patients, if you have somebody who is of the Medicare population, that would be great. That's fine, especially if there's somebody who is eloquent and can articulate exactly what acupuncture means to them and what it's done for them. However, I think that can come from anybody. I really do. So if you, pick a patient that you can work really well with, that is on fire for your services and what acupuncture does for them, and is very articulate, so you want to make sure that that they can convey in a really interesting way across a video screen, which is often harder to do, what it means to them. So.
Right. The population covered extends to people who are disabled, no?
It does.
It's not
And
just
so
seniors. The title of the bill is for our seniors.
It is. It's because the bigger bill was acupuncture for our heroes and seniors, and it ran a separate piece with veterans. And so she went with the seniors acronym as well. But it is a change to Medicare. And so that it would apply to whomever CMS is reimbursing for healthcare services. And that does include a significant disability population. So those stories are always compelling. So, Blake talked earlier, he talked at the symposium, and I'm so sorry, I was editing that video later. So to me, he was just talking about social determinants of health. Blake, would you reiterate what you just experienced on the Hill one more time with regards to the social determinants of health? You're muted.
Talking into the void as usual. So many of the members of Congress right now are focusing on what are called the social determinants of health. We've all heard about what those are, whether that be in our education or our personal experience, whatever it may be. There's now a caucus for those who need a reminder or don't know. Caucuses are only on the House side of Congress, but there is now a caucus on the social determinants of health. That means that pieces of legislation that support them, pieces of legislation that at all harp on them are presented, and then the groups that are advocating on behalf of promoting the social determinants of health or factors that influence them provide pieces of education to these members of Congress. And what you were asking, Bill, is it's not just seniors, it's those with disabilities, correct? It goes even beyond that. When we talk about Medicare inclusion, we talk about the ability to qualify for provision in health savings accounts. People who have health savings accounts can actually now seek out our services. There's the potential for downstream effects of having qualification for residency programs and then loan repayment programs. When we talk about all of that, plus the additional Medicare programs like CHIP, the Child Health Insurance Program, that directly influences those who may be the wants, not the haves. And so we talk about these social determinants. Medicare inclusion is the greatest potential way for us to, as acupuncturists, make a large national impact on them. We are here again to promote accessibility to our medicine, and we know that we not only mitigate disease and symptoms, but we actually promote health and wellness. And that's exactly what the social determinants are looking at. So keep that perspective, and if it resonates with you, if you have an experience with that, if you have a very short patient testimonial that's directly attributed to it, then drop in that terminology. Great. But Medicare really it's one of the biggest ways that we can address those social determinants, again, from a federal perspective.
The research that we're wanting you to do, this is on your legislator, and we're going to provide you also with the name of the healthcare legislative aid. So that will go up on Basecamp tomorrow, and each of you will have the information that, at least for that research piece. That's what we're asking you to do. Next slide, please. We are looking for people who have their own Zoom accounts. This is all I'm going to say on this slide tonight. We recognized when we did this with nearly 1,000 people that that we needed help in the technology department, and we also needed more control in the technology department. We wanted to make sure that we were capable of rescheduling if need be. So so I would like for people who are interested and do have a Zoom account and don't mind being responsible for the meetings. Many of you are going to have to do it anyway, because again, these are one-offs for you. Just reach out to me, please, via email or through Basecamp. Next slide, please. And that's how you reach me. So feel free to ping me inside of Basecamp, or you can email me, and we can talk there as well.